Greetings, everybody, and a very warm welcome from the PMI Victorian History Library. I'm Lauren Joffe and the library's Chief Librarian. Our President, Judith Ellis, sends her profuse apologies for not being here tonight due to a post-holiday head cold. A very warm welcome to our special guests, Kate Gray, Dr. Michelle Negus Cleary, and Dr. Jared Paul. I will introduce them in more detail shortly, but I would also like to acknowledge Dennis Carell. He's one of our board members, he's Vice President. Our library is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Our facilities. The bathroom, through the main doors at the back, turn right, and the bathroom is on your left. Emergency exits, outside this door, down the corridor. There's one and another outside the main doors behind you. In any emergency, the staff will direct you out of the building. The library was established in 1854. We are the second oldest public library in Victoria. We have a collection of over 40,000 items, and we take pride in being the sole library in Australia with such an extensive collection available for loan. Our library staff, Ellen, she's at the back, and Jade, will be taking photos and videos during tonight's event for promotional purposes and for later viewing on our YouTube channel. If you prefer not to be included, please let us know. This week is National Archaeology Week, and as part of that, our event is about the archaeological heritage of Victorian Railways. Tonight, we have 3 expert speakers who will cover everything from the 19th century formation of the Victorian Railways to the recent archaeological sites around the suburban rail infrastructure happening along the Belgrave and Lilydale lines. First will be Kate Gray, who is the director at Lovell Chen, an architecture and heritage company. Then Dr. Michelle Negus Cleary, technical director of archaeology and heritage at Dr. Vincent Clark Archaeology and Heritage. And finishing up with Dr. Jared Paul, historical team lead, also at Dr. Vincent Clark Archaeology and Heritage. Please Google these wonderful experts via their company websites and learn all about their work and research. I would also like to acknowledge the Australian Archaeological Association for the grant that has covered the delicious food for tonight. After the presentation, there'll be some hot snacks. If you have any questions, please can you wait until after the 3 speakers have finished talking, and then we'll have a question time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, and thank you everyone for coming along tonight and for having me. I should say at the outset, I'm not a rail expert and I know there are many people here who are rail experts, so I'll just say that at the outset. I work in heritage. I'm a historian by training, and would say I was more of a generalist. Melbourne's rail network was largely established by the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. The earliest rail lines were developed by private companies in the 1850s and 60s. The Victorian Railways Department was established in the mid-1850s, and by the mid-1860s, the main trunk lines going out into country Victoria had been established. The rail networks were expanded in the 1870s, but with more significant expansion in the 1880s in the boom period. And that goes for both the country rail network and the suburban lines. And the suburban lines what they really did was to facilitate really substantial suburban development in that period. So there were a small number of new lines in the early 20th century, and some lines and stations were closed, in fact, of course, through the 20th century. But essentially, the network as we know it had been established by about 1910. But while the network itself is a legacy of the 19th century, its performance and the way it's used today and performs today reflects on major infrastructure and system upgrades across the network over the past 120 years. And tonight I want to talk about two major infrastructure upgrade projects that occurred about 100 years, or one still occurring, but about 100 years apart: electrification and level crossing removals. So the first part of my talk is on electrification. Electrification, I love this quote. In 1927, having finished the electrification project, the Victorian Railways sponsored an exhibition and published a pamphlet associated with that exhibition on the newly completed electrification of the suburban rail system. And I might just read this quickly. So, sitting comfortably in your morning train to the city, chatting with your neighbour or scanning your news sheet, do you ever give a thought to the mighty force that propels you effortlessly and safely to your journey? Riding easily and swiftly by seascape or towards distant blue hills to the rhythmic click-clack of well-sprung wheels on their twin steel ribbons, and with fresh air and bush scents blowing through open windows, does the wonder of man's achievement in harnessing nature to your service ever occur to you? So I think people were being told in no uncertain terms this project had delivered major benefits to them, and it really had, and it was at a very, very high cost, which was this. And I think it was probably not 1927. I've given the benefit of the doubt so as not to inflate the amount, but it was completed around the early 20s, this project. So that's an awful lot of money for that period. Electrification affected really the whole suburban network, and this is a fabulous map showing the stations and the major facilities and the network at that time. And you can see, I'll go through the major key parts of electrification, but essentially it was a project that had to generate power, distribute power, set up the whole operation of the electrified system. So it was really far-reaching in that way. One of the first things that had to be constructed was an actual power station. So this is the Newport Power Station, which was built in, thank you very much, 1913 to 19 at Newport. So that's on the banks of the Yarra there, near where I live in Yarraville, expanded in the 1920s. So this is a major, obviously, undertaking to construct a new power station. And it was expanded in the 20s by Newport B, and also supplied power for industry. So a major piece of infrastructure. And people might be familiar with these fantastic DC electrical railway substations, which there are still 5 of these very monumental red brick designs around the inner suburbs. And they are really signifiers of this incredible project that was undertaken in that period. This one is the North Fitzroy substation, adapted to a new use now, and people might know the one at Newport, which is an arts facility there. Just the sheer scale of these buildings, and some of them do have still some internal features which people might know about, but they're really quite incredible. The next thing, of course, was the overhead network itself, really a complex system comprising steel gantries, lattice towers, supporting copper cable, and then the contact wire coming down again from the copper cable. So this was obviously a very, very complicated piece of work that was undertaken in a staged manner across the network at night and on weekends. So no different to what happens today with major rail infrastructure projects. And there's the very complicated junction at North Melbourne, where you've got a very wide corridor and these huge gantry structures running across the corridor. And then the rolling stock. The rolling stock, as I understand it, there was some forward planning for electrification, and so the rolling stock that was being produced allowed for the adaptation to electrification, and many of these were made at the big new workshops at Newport. And on top of these physical kind of elements that I've shown you today, there was obviously also a huge capacity required for just the maintenance and attention to this network. There were particular workshops built at Jolimont, for example, just to accommodate all of the workers who worked on the network and responded to issues. So all of the controlling systems, the signalling, the automated level crossing control, safety appliances, and all of those sorts of things were also part of this major project. So, and actually an incredible project. And I noticed that I think the Victorian Institution of Engineers nominated the project as a project of kind of state significance. Fast forward, sort of fast forward. So we look at level crossings through the 20th century, but obviously the more recent project also really a major transformative change really to the network. Melbourne is very flat and there are a lot of level crossings. This causes not only congestion, but obviously collisions and injury and loss of life. And through the 20th century, there were variously concerns raised periodically and consistently about level crossings. So it's a continuing theme. There are some early level crossing removal. This is a very interesting one that people might know because it's actually very near here, obviously, where the tram, the high street tram was to be constructed, and that wasn't permitted to occur until the rail line through that area from Malvern back to Hawkesbury was dug into a trench. So effectively removing that clash between the tramway and the railways. And I suppose with these sorts of things, you see an entirely new station form as well. So you'll get there's a series of stations along this section of the network, which were all rebuilt in the 1910s. So you get these built form characteristics where the intervention has occurred. So you've got the 4 stations there sitting down into the corridor. Another aspect of the management of level crossings is obviously the automation of gates, which were originally hand operated and later automated. This is at my local station in Yarraville, where the gates still operate the pedestrian gates with boom gates. So that was another key issue. There were still hand operated gates until well into the 20th century, into the middle of the 20th century. There were some major road over, I suppose you'd call it now, interventions in the 1950s and 60s. This one here is at Sunshine on the right, and the one on the left, which I've just used as street view, is at Newport. So some of the more major kind of intersections where there were issues and accidents were addressed at that time. And then, of course, we come to the level crossing removal project of the 2010s and ongoing, which really has and is having a transformative impact on the on parts of the network, including new stations, for example. And I think we'll look back in years to come on this phase as a distinct phase, similar to electrification in some ways, where there was really a major physical change and significant numbers of new stations constructed with the grade separation and the creation of some of these public open spaces. So there are some urban changes that come with these upgrades to the system. And I really just wanted to finish with a few images of stations that have been delivered. These are all a little different. Some of them are rail under, as in this case at Mentone, where the rail goes into the trench and the station building is sitting up at the upper level. You've got some new stations. This is Croydon, very distinctive, contemporary designs, very high quality architecture in most cases as well. And that's
that's a rare one.
I don't know what happened there. Dogan here still decided it doesn't insufficient data to open that.
You didn't pay what you do?
That's okay.
That's okay. We will just go to the next one. Mary. Okay, the last two slides appear to not be going to.
Don't worry. I was really coming to the end anyway. It was really just to say that I think it's really interesting that you've got this project from the early 20th century, which was hugely transformative. I did have a little quote that I wanted to share with you. In 1901, it's from the Argus in 1901, where a supporter of electrification was writing to the newspaper, espousing the great benefits that would follow. And in doing that, the writer pointed to the transformation of London's Underground Railway, and the text said, "The sad stations, as soon as a train arrives, were suddenly filled with a pea soup fog that completely obliterated the dim lamps, while the experience of the passenger inside the tunnel was that of partial asphyxiation." Which I love. And, I mean, we didn't have the underground railway stations, but you still would have had this kind of fog of from the steam trains. And then it continues. About 15 months ago, however, the Central London Railway was opened for traffic. Brilliantly lighted, handsomely fitted electric cars whirled the delighted Londoner through pleasantly temperate atmosphere and an immaculately clean tube. So obviously it was going to be a fabulous outcome, and eventually I think it was a fabulous outcome for Melbourne's suburban network. When it was completed, it was said to have been internationally one of the most sophisticated networks there was. So that's me.
Thanks very much for that, and kind of segues nicely into this next presentation. So I'll continue tonight's talk by running through some of the findings the Dr. Vincent Clark Archaeology and Heritage team has unearthed during investigations as part of the level crossing removal project. So this talk will focus specifically on the Lilydale line and the work that we've been able to do over the past few years, focusing on 3 of the stations and the station precincts as well.
We're getting insufficient data again. Apparently Adobe decided it's working before we started. Adobe appears to have decided it doesn't like us today. I'm trying to get, we've got the original PowerPoints too.
Yeah, it might be just open up the original ones if it's not liking the combined one.
I think it's because it's such a big file. That's okay. It's really easy to fix. Sorry about the hiatus.
Yes, I know that.
You tested it works beautifully, so if I do kind
Very much a summary. History. That would mean it's just a current project.
that's what I'm trying to do.
So it's also donation.
There's an opportune time for a bad joke, which is we're now back on track. Okay, so for some context, Lilydale line, this is what we're talking about. So the Lilydale line was one of 23 lines authorised for construction under the Railway Construction Act of 1880, and it was a continuation from Hawthorn. So C&E Miller were awarded the tender to build the railway line, which originally included the construction of station buildings, a barbed wire fence on either side of the permanent way, a timber footbridge at Box Hill, and a turntable at Lilydale for the cost of almost £80,000 in 1881. So the line was opened originally in 1882 as a single track line with stations at Camberwell, Canterbury, Box Hill, Blackburn, Emery's Hill, which is now Mitcham, Ringwood, Warrandyte, which is now Croydon, not to be confused with Warrandyte, and Lilydale. So the new stations were then added subsequently in the late 19th century, which included Surrey Hills in 1883, Murrelbach in 1887, Mont Albert in 1890, East Camberwell in 1900, followed then in the 20th century by Ringwood East in 1925 and Chatham in 1927, and finally Laburnum, which was the latest addition in 1958. So upgrades to the line were continually rolled out throughout the 20th century. For instance, the electrification of the line in this instance along this stretch from Ringwood was completed in 1923, followed by the entire line in 1925 for more efficient travel. So the team at Dr. Vincent Clarke were fortunate enough to be able to help with the archaeological and heritage management of the stations along the Lilydale line as part of the level crossing removal project. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on 3 of the station precincts, which we've been we have worked within, which is Murrelbach and Lilydale between 2020 and 2022, and Surrey Hills and Mont Albert between 2022 and 2023. For each site, consents were issued by Heritage Victoria for works to occur within protected historical archaeological sites, and which also allowed for our team to undergo a program of archaeological investigations. This involved both manual excavations, so we were there with hand tools with buckets and digging old school ways, but for most of it we were also monitoring a lot of mechanical excavation, which involved excavation of trenches, a lot of box out areas, and construction within designated historical heritage areas or zones. So if historical heritage was unearthed during this phase, any features were recorded by our team. So prior to us being on site, our amazing team in the office undertook a detailed analysis of the historical record, including a review of historical maps and plans. We also reviewed aerial photos and historical newspaper references to ensure we captured any potential archaeological features to analyse once we're on the ground. We then assessed modern ground disturbance to provide analysis for any potential for that historical heritage to still be present subsurface. For the 3 station precincts within this talk, our team was able to identify archaeological remains that were directly linked to the operation of these stations, inclusive of rail infrastructure and also domestic residences for railway staff. So in the interest of time, we could spend hours going through everything that we did find, but I just want to put the spotlight on a few key findings we have uncovered. The first broadly relating to railway infrastructure. So first up, Lilydale Railway Station was the terminus for the Hawthorn to Lilydale line and had a rail yard that included a turntable, engine shed, ash pits, water tower, and a coal stage. So works within the rail yard uncovered sections of the engine shed footings, an ash pit, as you can see here as well, and also turntable pits. So 2 sections of concrete footings were found within a disturbed context, and 4 red gum timber features, which may have also formed the superstructure and were associated with the engine shed at the station. For the ash pit, this was located to the west of the current substation. That would have been used it would have been on the turntable siding, so indicated on the formal plans. So you can see here, again, a wonderful GIS and mapping team are able to sort of overlay some of those older plans against the modern aerial. And then what we have found, again, is sort of overlay on that to get a picture of where we were digging and what we were finding. So for the ash pit located west of the current substation, it would have been, the pit was almost 10 metres in length by 2 metres in width, with the walls and floor made of brick. These were Hoffman bricks and were constructed in an English bond construction with through bolts. So remnant ash on the floor is associated with the de-ashing of locomotive when the rail yard was in operation, and the ash pit would have allowed locomotives to be de-ashed and resupplied with coal and water prior to their return journey. 2 turntable pits were also uncovered. One was a 70-foot and the other one was a 53-foot. The 70-foot turntable was indicated on the Victorian Railway plans. However, the 53-foot turntable was not identified in the available historical documents. And so this is something that we were able to add to that record by doing the archaeology. These pits were primarily reconstructed of concrete with brick sections also evident. So also at Lilydale, a timber bridge with 6 openings and 11-foot, approximately 3-metre spans was constructed, likely with the line in 1882, south of what is now Main Street and Maroondah Highway. Local accounts and aerial imagery also suggests that this former Lilydale Bridge was then buried around the mid-1980s. So during excavation, our team were able to uncover features associated with this former Lilydale Railway Bridge, which included brick piers and the original timber piers as well. So as you can see here, in that sort of top picture, 10 brick piers, again made of an English bond construction technique, were constructed with 3 individual sections spaced 2 metres apart. During the removal of these brick piers, a number of timber piles from their original timber bridge were then exposed and embedded into the clay at a depth of approximately 2 metres. You can see here that image there, we've kind of highlighted some of those features cut into the clay. And a great find as well, to be able to find timber intact. These piles include a combination of both circular and square piles in a singular and double configurations. In addition to this, 73 sections of concrete decking were also exposed during these works. Now, sometimes even with all the historical research and planning, unexpected historical heritage does occur, as is the nature of archaeology. We can do all the planning beforehand, but until you actually dig, you're not sure what you're going to find. And this was the case for Surrey Hill Station, with the discovery of 4 interlocking swing gates right underneath the Union Road crossing. These footings were found intact and in situ, almost directly underneath the crossing, and date to 1890. The 4 interlocking swing gates shared consistent features and construction methodology. The wells were built with an English bond, again, construction technique, with the walls approximately 350 mil in width. The dimension of the wells, again, were on an average of 1.5 metres in diameter internally and 2 metres in diameter for their outermost area. We were also able to clear a lot of the areas, just sort of anecdotally. We found this right between the shift between a day shift and a night shift. So our team were frantically digging away into the night. As you can see there, that top image with the floodlights on. And then the next day we were able to get in and clear it up, and then also take some fantastic photogrammetry shots of the 4 features to be able to then, in future reference as well, have a look at it as a 3D model, but also position it within its context. So the metal gate pivot as well, recorded on all 4 structures, were rectangular in shape and had a central metal rod connecting with 2 bolts. As you can see here as well, terracotta drainage were also consistently found across the 4 structures, as were 2 drainage pipes located at the base of the walls of the well. So while these large swing gates and the gate posts themselves were removed around 1962, the wells were present, and these footings and foundations were reasonable condition underneath the Union Road surface. And so we were able to sort of get in there and document them. So while rail infrastructure and features related to the operation of the rail is vitally important in painting a picture of 19th century transportation, equally as important are the individuals who dedicated their lives to servicing not only the stations, but the community who use the rail network. One of the most important jobs in this regard was the station masters, who were integral to running and the running of a station. The job was often demanding, as they were ultimately responsible for the movement not only of trains but also of passengers, and were well-known figures to the community. So to ease the burden of this position, station masters, and if they had families as well, were housed in departmental residences or station masters' residences, often within the rail corridor and close to a station. Sort of an example here from Mont Albert, you can see the station platform right there, and it's sharing a boundary, and also well labelled SM and station master. This was also, the closeness was also in order to meet the needs and demands of running the station being so close by. So the residences were built to a standardised plan, made of timber, and included living rooms, kitchen areas, bedrooms, and often without buildings within a fenced boundary to offer privacy. This is pretty much a stock standard example of what you would find. So many of these residences were removed due to the reduced need of the position in light of the rail improvements, especially along the Lovell line and across the network in the mid to late 20th century. What's great for us as archaeologists is they were then often asphalted over to make way for car parking spaces, as these footprints were often very close to the station itself. So in the process of removing and asphalting this area, the likelihood to preserve remains of structures. What we're interested in is things like timber flooring, timber footing, timber posts, but also rubbish pits that had been dug into the ground as formal rubbish collection in these newly formed suburbs were still developing. And these are increased in an area like this, but not always certain, as we will soon see. So as such, we've been able to find examples of these residences at both Mooroolbark Station and also Surrey Hill Station, which I'll sort of introduce now. So built with the station in 1887, the Mooroolbark Station Master's house would have included a simple gabled roof with a central chimney and adjacent fireplaces in the kitchen and living room, and was in use from 1887 all the way up to 1973. From our historical research as well, occupancy records details the names and dates for 13 of these consecutive occupants between 1920 and 1973, the longest of which was Station Master Andrew Bell and his family, who lived there for 20 years between 1940 and 1960. So between this time, Andrew and his wife lived there with their 8 children. So to put that into context, the conditions of the residences, while amazing on plan, the reality is that the house, especially when they first arrived, did not have any hot water. There was no septic sewerage and there was no gas connection. So you'll appreciate your hot shower tonight when you think back at the station master's residence and that at Mooroolbark Station. Features and deposits uncovered as part of our excavation included red gum timber posts, post holes, underground services for later drainage and sewage that did eventually come, as well as a brick feature here, shaded in that red area, which was associated with outdoor paths and also verandas. What was also fantastic for our team was artefacts collected from this excavation totaled almost 7,500, with the largest category type was glass, which included jars and also bottles, some examples as you can see there, followed by ceramic, metal, animal bone, and also shell. So artefacts found also included children's toys, you can see from this picture as well, indicative of the family that was living at the residence, along with the domestic items that reflected the eating and drinking patterns. So we were able to really paint a picture using both the historical record, but then also what was uncovered in the archaeological record. Moving on to Surrey Hills, a station master's residence was in use from 1889 until 1959, with detailed plans of the residence, including a kitchen, living room, parlour, and hall with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. We were lucky enough to find this plan as well in the the Victorian Railways collection online, which gave an excellent detail of what we were hoping to find. We were able then to lay out the map to target our excavation specifically. However, as soon as we started digging pretty quickly into the first half an hour, we realised that our hopes were dashed, as the car park in this instance was bulk excavated for the levelling of what then was to become the new car park, leaving little in the way of architectural remains in the house. However, what we did and what we were able to find were cuts into the clay, which were indicative of the fireplace location, and the remains of the boundary fence with timber posts still in situ. Fence posts shared a consistent construction methodology as well, and appeared to be consistent with the techniques generally employed by the Victorian Railways. And sort of chalk and cheese for artefacts, we only found 24 recovered from this site, which again provided very little evidence. So it just goes to show that not everything's underneath the car park. So as you can see from the examples above and from this sort of brief overview of the results from our team, railway stations and the areas within rail reserves can offer a wealth of archaeological information that shows the growth of the burgeoning outer suburbs of Melbourne from the late 19th century onwards, which was intrinsically linked with the construction and maintenance of the railways themselves. So thanks for your attention.
It's the same as the roundabout discussed in our hearing. Why did they actually two mountains? Way beyond the stage of the ship.
So thank you all for coming tonight. It's wonderful to see so many rail heritage enthusiasts in the building. And thank you both to my previous speakers. I think you've set me up very well to give context to what I'm going to talk about. So I'm talking about what's affectionately known as the Loco Depot, which was its proper name was the North Melbourne Locomotive Depot. It was constructed to store and resupply coal to the Victorian Railways steam locomotive engines that were used on the Victorian regional lines. It replaced the former Spencer Street, Williamstown locomotive depots. Our team was engaged to assist with archaeological investigations over a range of different infrastructure upgrades that have been needed in this site over the past few years. So we thought it was a good opportunity to talk about this site, as it's quite an interesting topic, I think, anyway. I would also just want to mention I am not an expert in rail in and of itself or rail infrastructure. My expertise is archaeology, so please, if I'm using a terminology or there's something, please forgive me if I'm getting something a little wrong, and I'm really happy for anyone to give me some corrections or some extra info after the talk today. So the depot was a major infrastructure development in the late 19th century that was part of huge changes made to the landscape of West Melbourne and North Melbourne, and it required the infilling of the former West Melbourne Swamp and wetlands. It included the creation of the Moonee Ponds Creek, which the southern part of which is completely artificial. It was cut and formed as the Railway Coal Canal in order to supply coal to the railway depot. And you can see its location is just here. That's the extent of the North Melbourne Locomotive Depot site. So it's not far from Docklands and right on what is now Moonee Ponds Creek, but it's an artificial cutting, which I'll talk about a little more. The main focus of this depot complex was the main shed, which was known as K188 shed, and it was used for the storage and maintenance of these steam locomotive engines from 1888. And recent archaeological excavations have confirmed that the entire floor of this loco shed was intact and well preserved, and it's below. You can see here in this image, there's not very much covering it actually in a lot of places. We've got maybe 100 millimetres there of crushed rock covering it. So the complex of the depot encapsulated several other structures as well, which I'll talk about a little bit. But the significance of the site is, I'll also talk about too. Essentially, the complex included this main loco depot shed, as you can see here. There's also the coal loading stage, which was connected via a loop railway line to the coal wharf that was located on this newly artificially cut Railway Coal Canal. There's also paint sheds, other workshops, and a whole lot of rail sidings and other lines that were part of this complex. So it's quite a large and significant infrastructure project, creating it in 1888. The site itself is quite significant due to its key role in the history of the early Victorian Railways, which Kate has given us some great insights into tonight, and its expansion throughout the state of Victoria. At one time, it was arguably, the loco shed that is, was arguably, and that's it there, one of the largest buildings in the southern hemisphere. It was 210 metres long and 60 to 70 metres wide. That's a photo of it there. That's the whole loco shed. So you can see it's quite an impressive building. The site was also associated with major development works in Victoria, such as the expansion of railway lines, the reclamation of the West Melbourne Swamp, and the construction of the Railway Coal Canal, which I've already mentioned. The loco shed itself and the depot also have great social and historical significance to the state, because the depot was a major employer in Melbourne during the late 19th and throughout the 20th century until 1965 when it closed. It was the focus of many historic industrial actions as well throughout the 20th century. I'll just skip that one. So just turning to the loco shed, which is our main focus for tonight. We have these wonderful archival photographs. The ones in colour are from the day it was demolished in January 1965. And the ones that are in black and white date to around 1904, that era. So we've got some great resources. But the main depot shed, as I've said, is an enormous building. It housed as many as 200 locomotives where they were serviced and maintained and refuelled. It was in continual operation from its opening in 1888 until its demolition in 1965 with the phasing out of coal-powered trains. It was built of brick with 3 large gabled roofs that had made of steel trusses with large skylights. Engines entered and exited the building via the large arched openings, which you can see in this photograph here. The engines themselves were loaded with coal from steel ductwork suspended from the ceiling that was connected to the coal stage on the south side of the building. So it was quite, not fully automated, but quite innovative at the time. The engines were cleaned, maintained and stored in this shed on 3 enormous rail turntables situated within the building. There were long linear maintenance pits, a series of drainage pits and all kinds of utilitarian type infrastructure within the building itself. You can also see the large 44,000 gallon water tank that once stood at the eastern end of the shed. Some more wonderful photographs just showing us what it was like inside the shed. This is from 1904. You can see those coal loading chutes suspended from the trusses in the ceiling.
Ventilation.
Sorry?
Their ventilation.
Oh, their ventilation. Okay,
Yeah,
so I'm
coal's done
wrong.
outside of coal stage.
Thank you. See, this is why I'm doing this job.
No, didn't want to wait to the end.
That's fine. Anyway, basically, coal comes in from somewhere, which I completely got wrong, but that's fine. Their ventilation, that makes a lot more sense to me. And you can see they're nicely lined up on the railway turntables. And you can see the central circular pits with these central pivoting rail components that probably have a technical name that someone can tell me afterwards. You can see another of these rail turntable pits, and I'll talk about them a little more as well. So recent infrastructure projects have required a variety of different impacts to the site. The site is protected as a Victorian Heritage Inventory site, which is a listed archaeological site that's protected under the Heritage Act 2017. So any impacts to this site require a consent from Heritage Victoria. So various consents were obtained in order to do archaeological investigations in advance of impacts occurring to the site. You can see from this plan, the green obviously is the outline of the footprint of the former loco shed, and you can see the 3 rail turntables with their central pits. The blue is all of the archaeological trenching that was done. And you can see most of the trenching is linear and obviously smaller exposures. However, I will tell you this building is 200 metres from there to there. So it's actually quite a significant amount that we got to see under the ground, which was a great opportunity. So some of our main results is a
I just wanted to talk about a few things because we don't have all night. But essentially, we have floors and walls remaining. This is the northeast corner of the loco shed where we actually found the exterior wall. You can see it's 4 bricks deep. You can see the floor, it's very well preserved. The entire floor of the loco shed was covered with brick paving, many Hoffman bricks as well, but also bricks from a whole variety of different potteries around Melbourne, like Blackburn, Northcote. I think they just had to get everything that they could that was available to build this structure. We've also got part of the base of the wall of the eastern facade of the building, and you've got these beautifully dressed bluestone blocks. They may have been used for damp coursing, but they also may have been part of the aesthetic design of the building. And this is part of that long linear trench that went almost 200 metres. You can see it's only 0.5 metre wide, but you can see that this brick pavement just continues. It's just everywhere under the ground on the site. This is another section of the northern wall of the Loco Depot building. You can see it's quite a mighty construction as well, and what we couldn't really record is it's actually fully arched. There's quite a beautiful brick vaulted opening in it, and there's these huge drains that actually penetrate out through the exterior of the building. So it's quite mighty stuff going on, even deeper than what we were able to find. We never quite got to the base of the walls during our investigations. Another feature here is a bit of timber conduit that, again, if there's rail enthusiasts here who might know something about it, we thought it was perhaps some early signalling infrastructure. It contained what looked like electrical wires of some kind. So anyway, any thoughts on that, please get in touch with me. There are also numerous areas of the pavement where there were bases, we think, for probably heavier machinery or something of that nature. And these parts of the trench exposures that we did, we can see we've got a threshold here through a doorway. You can see this deformation that's occurred to the brick pavement. The brick pavements were just laid on a clean sand bed and then just layers of fill, and below that is cut up silt. So this site is not particularly stable as a foundation. And over the years, as you can see, the depth that it's buried is very shallow in this part of the site. So over the years, with rail stock and vehicles and everything driving over the rail yard, since it was closed and the building demolished, it's caused deformation actually to this pavement. Some of the deformation also could have occurred during its use, which is interesting. There was also quite interesting features in the paving, like these diagonal lines with slight sloping into them, which we think formed some kind of drainage line. That perhaps they washed a whole lot of stuff down and had to drain a lot of water off the floor at times. Yeah, so that was quite an interesting finding that this brick pavement was so extensive across the site. This is a plan that we found from 1950. Unfortunately, we couldn't find the other half, so we don't have that full plan. If anyone here has any knowledge of where we might be able to find the other part, please let me know. But you can see we've got turntable C, turntable B. That's the western one, so north is actually down in this image, and we haven't quite got turntable A at the east. But you can see the turntables are quite massive, and you can see the way the building has actually been arranged in terms of getting engines in and out. The rail turntables were 65 metres in diameter, and the central pit was around 22 metres in diameter. So they're quite big. You can see that they're linked by this central railway line, which obviously was the central pivot for most of them. And each one is linked by these entry sort of exit rail lines as well. The other feature I would point out is underneath the spokes of the turntables, you've obviously got the rail, but between the rails there were these linear maintenance pits underneath most of the spokes. So they were very well preserved under the ground as well. This is just some examples of turntable features that we uncovered. With some of them, we've got some brick paving between rails, which we're not really sure. We think that this is a later modification. Here we've got this part of turntable A, which is at the far eastern end. And that's where they've got some timber sleepers there, not just so they didn't all have the maintenance pits all the way along them. And this is in turntable, the middle turntable, which is turntable B, where we have the brick pavement, we have the rail. I'm sorry, I haven't got the other bit in the photo, but this is the maintenance pit that's been filled. So after the building was demolished in 65, they actually backfilled all of those pits with fill material containing various things. And something I did want to say about the turntables, a former employee, Mr. Williams, wrote about, who worked at the depot shed. In the 1950s, he gave a description of their use. He said out the eastern turntable, oil burners incorrectly sometimes, resulting in explosions with sufficient force up the chimney to blow off large sections of roof sheeting. Exclamation mark. The middle table was used for minor repairs, and the western turntable C was used for serious repairs, including a drop pit to enable a set of wheels to be dropped, usually for bearing repairs. So it was just a nice little anecdote about blowing off the roof sheeting. So again, some of our linear trenches, you can see the shallowness of the burial, and you can see these are these angular spokes coming off the turntables that we've just happened to expose. Some parts of the southern part of the building have had some disturbance, possibly because it is buried so shallowly. But yeah, you can see here again, you've only got 300 metres of crushed rock in some areas protecting these quite large and well-preserved areas of pavement floor of the shed. Another feature that I did mention before of the pits is these maintenance pits, of the turntables and maintenance pits. So there's some photos of them without the engine on them. We were lucky enough to dig one completely out because they were filled with fill that contains some unpleasant things, I would say. This one here, you can see we're at the end and we've had to impact the end of it. This is actually the wall of the turntable. So that end is actually here, if you can see that. And then this is the maintenance pit. The engine would have sat on top of that on those two rails. You can see the pit's constructed with brick walls, a really nice sloping brick floor that goes down to a central drain that was covered with a metal plate. And the rails are sitting on hardwood timber sleepers below there. And this is a pretty typical construction that we saw around the loco shed site. In some areas too, we had, we're at the end of one of those pits there, that's an end wall, and then you can see there's another pit starting not far away at that point. We had some really nice exposure of construction details, so if anyone's interested, we've got some information about turntable pit constructions. Another thing that we were really lucky to get as well was we got to dig through the centre of turntable C. And as you can see, in every turntable, there's a pivot in the middle. That is the basis that has a mechanism, obviously, for turning the turntable. One of the questions Heritage Victoria had for us was, is there any evidence of these mechanisms or the central turning component of the rail to be present? And the answer is no, there's not for turntable C. We actually got to the very bottom of turntable C and we dug out half of the centre of it. You can see there's a concrete base with a metal fixture or fastening that obviously the mechanism sat on and had brick walls around it. Most of those have come off. It's lime mortar used, so they don't kind of stay on over time. They've been buried for a long time, but that was a really interesting finding for us and probably for anyone interested in the history of the local shed. In terms of artefacts, large industrial sites like these are usually pretty clean archaeologically. So archaeologists, we love rubbish, and the more rubbish that's left, the better for us, the more info we get. And usually these late 19th century or early 20th century industrial sites, they're usually often quite clean in terms of artefacts and refuse. We found a lot of the usual things you'd expect. You've got your rail spikes, you've got numerous examples of different bricks, as I've mentioned already. Things like insulators or ceramic insulators of all different types, which is quite interesting, and lots of metal fasteners and lots of sort of mid-20th century rubber brakes for trains, which I haven't illustrated. However, there were several historical sources related to the workers and how they, their performance while they were working in the loco shed. And they described that there were high levels of alcohol consumption whilst at work on site. It would be expected, therefore, for us archaeologically, that we might find a lot of alcohol bottles present, or at least the remains of them. However, we didn't. So we did find a few examples of green and brown beer bottle fragments, which probably don't look like much in that photo, but yeah, we can't, they either cleaned up well after themselves, or or it's a fair fee. I'm not sure one way or another. One thing we did find, though, was a very significant artefact deposit in another location that was quite unexpected. This red circle shows the approximate location of where the Loco Depot complex is, or what was on these historic maps. This is 1864, and that gives us a representation of what this area of West Melbourne, North Melbourne was like prior to European contact. And you can see it's an amazing wetland with this quite beautiful, was described as quite beautiful at the time, lagoon that later became known as the West Melbourne Swamp, or Batman Swamp. It was part of a quite complex hydrological system and wetland system that extended all the way up to Flemington Road, and was part of the flooding and drying out events that occurred through Moonee Ponds Creek, Maribyrnong River and the Yarra River. Obviously, white people came and we ruined everything by urbanising and changing all the natural hydrological system. Obviously, traditional owners were pushed out and no longer were there to care for the land. Flora and fauna, native flora and fauna were gone. And this area basically became a stagnant wasteland, covered with toxic waste from the emerging industries around Footscray and West Melbourne, and also being used to dump lots of waste from North Melbourne, West Melbourne, and possibly parts of the city itself. You can see by comparing it with the 1910 map that there's quite a distinct change in the same location. The government decided, I could talk about this for an hour, so I'm going to try and keep it really tight. But basically, there was a government decision to significantly modify the land in this area by draining the swamp and infilling it and making this land available for the Victorian Railways, the Port of Melbourne, and also to create the West Melbourne Swamp, West Melbourne Rubbish Tips on Dudley Road. Darman Road, not Dudley Road. Essentially, then you see the cutting of the Coal Canal, you see the Koodarn Canal for the Yarra River and Victoria Dock being created, and this whole area gets drained but also filled to raise the level up to prevent flooding events. There had to be some excavation on the northern edge of the Loco Depot site, and we were called out because they actually found quite, it looks quite messy and gross, but that's archaeology. Basically, it's the top of a very extensive and deep artefact-bearing deposit that is covered, is at 2 metres deep in that location. It is covered with ballast and crushed rock that was used to form the rail yard. And you can see some of the artefacts we were bringing up from that deposit. But that was a really interesting finding from this site. You can see we had a lot of organic materials preserved because it was quite a wet deposit. It's basically sitting in a waterlogged area that was, because it was once a swampland. We had a range of different things, obviously lots and lots of different types of glass vessels and ceramic vessels, lots of organics, including animal bones and oyster shells and things like that, as well as, I think we have, I don't know how many shoes we have so many shoes. This is a parasol fragment, and we had some metals preserved as well as lots of personal items. So this deposit was unexpected, but it also helps to tell us more about early Melburnians and what they ate, how they dressed, what they used, also what they threw away as well, which is quite interesting. The deposit also contains some commercial or light industrial waste in it as well. So analysis of that will give us new insights into the time period. The date range at the moment for that is 1850 to about the 1880s. So it predates the formation of the rail yard in that area. So that's where I'm going to leave the North Melbourne Loco, with this lovely photo of its demolition by engine. Basically, they tied a huge cable around the end wall on the east end and pulled, and this is what resulted. So although the superstructure of the building is gone, it's quite an amazing building. I think most of you will be given its size and its importance to the infrastructure of Victorian Railways at the time. And the archaeology of it is still preserved, very well preserved and quite extensive under the ground. And we just had the privilege of doing some information and I want to share that. So thank you. Thanks everyone.
We've got a mic coming.
Yes.
Just
Oh,
wait a
okay.
moment.
This is one aspect that troubles me.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's not as so you don't have to jump up. Who's going first?
Thank you.
There we are.
Thanks, Richard. No.
And I've turned it on to.
Um,
Oh, no. Yeah. Did it? It's not showing.
Testing.
There we go. Now.
1, 2, 3, 4. No, seriously, I think that was a wonderful presentation, and I was reminded of Pompeii, but I'm also aware that it's within my lifetime and the lifetime of a number of people here. My biggest issue is, why are you calling it the K188 shed? Now, this was a PR stunt by the railways. They were dieselising. The last steam engine to be used around Melbourne was K188, which was used out at Lilydale on the Warburton and Hillsville line. They brought it back, and in this obscene demonstration, they used it to pull down the shed, and it was purely a PR stunt to show that they were modernising. And just around the corner, they had this wonderful new South Dynon diesel depot for the diesels. Now, where you've got this 188 from is beyond me. It's the North Melbourne Railway or North Melbourne Loco Depot. 188's got nothing to do with it. It spent a little bit of time there. It was based there, but it spent, and I think Roderick here over in the corner is going to bear me out. I cannot believe that you are referring to it as K188. The K was built in 1946?
40s, yeah.
40s, yep.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with North Melbourne Loco Depot, and I think you're doing it a disservice. But I will praise you for what you've done. And I've got one other comment. No, seriously, it's only the nomenclature. One other comment. You've been marvellous doing that. There are other depots in Victoria, and I was involved at Castlemaine in rebuilding or restoring the Loco Depot at Castlemaine. And Heritage Victoria and VicTrack had entirely different attitudes towards us on the heritage side and V-Line or VicTrack. And V-Line and VicTrack destroyed, only in the last few years, the pits that you've gone all the trouble of uncovering and opening. VicTrack, just in the last few years, have destroyed those in Castlemaine Station on the main line, and yet they put onerous controls on us on the heritage side to preserve everything. And I think there's a real discordance between what the government department, VicTrack, who are a huge authority, and Heritage Victoria, who are very imposing on some of the heritage aspects. But that's all I wanted to say. But 188 was my biggest beef, but a wonderful presentation. I really thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Comment on that?